We've done a couple disturbing books at this point in videos I am proud of, such as House of Leaves, Playground, and... But none of those books have a really disturbing ending. House of Leaves had a somber ending that left questions, Playground had a very cathartic and peaceful ending, and the Redacted book just kinda had a blah ending. And I truly think that the ending of something can make or break a piece of media. For example, my two favorite endings of anything are Devilman Crybaby and the end of Evangelion. Two works that have unbelievably great and disturbing endings. However, I want to be clear saying that the book we are going to cover today is the most disturbing book ending I've ever read. It's not the most disturbing thing ever, but it's definitely the most what the f just happened ending. It might not hit as hard for you listening because I am telling you before you go into it that the ending is messed up, but I read this book going into it thinking it was going to be a super bloody and gory and splatter-punky book, but what I got was a lot different. Not a super gross and in-your-face book, but an oppressive and horrible atmosphere that was different from any other book that I've ever read. Now, if you haven't seen the title of the video, the book we're going over today is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, or Bazterrica. I don't know how to say her last name. An Argentinian author who has garnered several high-ranking rewards for this particular book. Now, this book was originally written in Spanish under the name Cadaver Exquisito in the year 2017, the year that I graduated, by the way, and was translated into English only in 2020. It may be one of the most famous books we've actually covered in the splatterpunk genre so far. It's pretty well regarded. Now, this book is also sort of a hard read. I only got the hang of it about 4 chapters in, because the language used in this book is purposely very vague, which I believe is meant to be that way, and I will explain why that is in the analysis of the video. But most of the time, the main character, who is named Marcos Tejo, is almost never referred to as anything other than his pronouns. As in, it will always say he or him. It will never say his name outright unless it is stated in dialogue. So it is sort of hard to follow at first. For example, even in the first chapter, before you even see his name once, the book will continually say things like, he lights a cigarette, or he opens a window. So it sort of makes things confusing in the book. Truthfully, I didn't even know the main character's name until like chapter 6. Like I said, there is a reason for this, but we'll get into it later. Now, with all of that out of the way, like I say in all of these videos, I really implore you to read the book before you watch this video, as the ending is something truly special and I don't want to spoil it if you haven't read it. In addition to that, like all of the videos, this will be broken up into 3 parts. The intro, which you are hearing now, the summary, and then the analysis at the end of the video. This is your last warning before we get into the summary, however, so please read the book first. But let's get into it. The book opens up with a dream our main character is having. Blood, slicing, cutting in half, mutilating, humans. He wakes up and starts to get ready for his job. He is a slaughterhouse worker. He dreads his job, however, the slaughterhouse he works for isn't a normal one, like for pigs or cows, but is a new type of slaughterhouse that has propped up in this world. A human slaughterhouse. This book is set during a dystopian future, one where all animals on Earth, besides humans, have come down with a disease that is super toxic and horrible to humans. So bad that if humans are even in close proximity to any animal, it can be deadly if they catch it. So, to fill the void of all the meat in the world going away, a lesser class of humans was distinguished. Ones that are to be slaughtered for meat, although they sterilize the world by using euphemisms for it. They don't call them humans to be slaughtered or human meat, they use words like specimens or special meat. Some scientists believe that it is a conspiracy theory in this world to deal with overpopulation. However, leading zoologists who believe this strangely disappear. But let's get back to our main character, Marcos Tejo. He is a middle manager in one of these human slaughterhouses, one called the Krieg Slaughterhouse. He hates his job, and he always wakes up too early because of stress. Another reason is that his wife no longer lives with him, for some reason that hasn't been explained yet. However, his wife won't even call him anymore. but his mother-in-law will call him and give him updates on his wife's condition. He goes downstairs and sees his TV before he goes into work. It's a commercial about the special meat. Kids gathered around a table in a typical nuclear family. It's an ad for the special meat. He turns it off in disgust. He starts his drive to a tannery. He is going there to talk to the higher-ups at this tannery about a shipment of head, which is another word for human meat to be slaughtered or eaten, that is going to be delivered to this tannery so they can use skin to make all sorts of things. The tannery is like a normal tannery of this world, only using human skin. He starts his drive and drives past miles and miles of empty farmland. Once filled with cows and pigs, now completely empty. Most animals were killed in the world, or at least animals governments could find during the transition, which is what they called the transition from normal meat to human meat. There are still animals that exist, but they are very far and few between, and it's very hard to find them. His mother-in-law calls him again and says that his wife, Cecilia, is doing a little bit better today, but she still isn't ready to talk or move back in with Marcos yet. Marcos is used to this sort of news, though. He gets to the tannery and meets Senor Urami, a strange man who seems to be a sadist, and he loves skin. He's obsessed with it, a real freak. But in the world they live in, it's not all that strange anymore, unfortunately. Because of his obsession, he's great at his job at the tannery. Senor Urami asks Marcos if they're going to get any quote-unquote black skins anytime soon. Marcos lies and says yes, they're going to get that and they'll send it right away, but he just wants to get out of there as soon as possible. Senor Urami and Marcos both then leave the tannery. His next stop of the day is to go to a breeding center, another place that is tied to his slaughterhouse. They get shipments from here to slaughter at his slaughterhouse. He drives there, and during his drive there, a nurse from a nursing home where his dad is calls him. He says that his father, Don Armando, is doing okay, despite having a few episodes here and there. He knows this and appreciates the updates. Marcos used to be very close to his father, and seeing him in a nursing home is hard on him, as I assume it would be hard if a family member has dementia to deal with something like that. It's not really explained what Marcos' dad has, if I remember, but I believe it's something sort of like dementia. Marcos, trying not to think about his dad, gets to the breeding center. He has business with the higher-ups of the breeding center named El Gringo. El Gringo, however, is giving a tour to a new German guy who's going to work there. The German man doesn't understand any Spanish, which is what they're speaking, and takes out an auto-translator to understand them. This shows that we are at least somewhat into the future. There are also video phones and things like that, which I guess we have those today, so I don't know why I wrote that in the script. But Marcos says that he'll join them on the tour and then talk to El Gringo after. El Gringo shows these humans, or peds as they sometimes call them, all in separate cages. They even have a stud, which is a term used today even for sexually active cows and pigs in slaughterhouses. Yet another euphemism to avoid the fact that they are breeding humans and such. El Gringo then shows them the FGPs, which stands for the First Generational Pure Humans, otherwise known as humans born and raised in captivity to be as tasty to other humans as possible, ones that have never known freedom or humanity at all. The German says that he's surprised that they're so quiet in these cages. He expects all of these people to be loud and rowdy. El Gringo says that these heads have their vocal cords cut very early in their lives. They use simplified language, but for the most part, they cannot communicate. Marcos is rightfully disgusted by all of this, but this is his job to deal with this kind of stuff. His father needs around-the-clock care, and because no one obviously wants to think about what human cattle like this is, it pays quite well what Marcos is doing. Even more so because Marcos is really good at his job. After a while, Marcos just goes to El Gringo to discuss business because he can't stand to be in this place any longer. He tells El Gringo that the last time they got a shipment of head, several of them were already dead, piled up on each other in the transport truck. This cannot happen again. El Gringo apologizes profusely and says it will not happen again. He then takes a little futuristic tube out and sticks it to one of the heads' arm. It cuts a piece of meat from the female head's arm out. It hurts her, but the wound gets dressed immediately. So not only are these people slaughtered like cows, they are tortured for meat too, like having arms cut off one at a time to eat. El Gringo offers the German and Marcos some meat, but Marcos declines. The other two are both shocked because this is like top of the line meat. It would be like Wagyu steak in our world, but Marcos declines anyway. He is disgusted by the whole transition of the world. Marcos also asks that El Gringo bring some black-skinned heads for the tannery. El Gringo says that he's not the first person to ask about that. Lots of slaughterhouses want black leather due to a fashion icon using it in their showcases. Before they finish the tour, El Gringo shows them some obese head. They are sent to make crackers and butter. But with this, the tour of El Gringo's business is over. Marcos leaves as soon as he can. He doesn't want to be here any longer. The next morning, Marcos wakes up and goes to a smaller room near his bedroom. A baby cot lies in it, empty. He touches it and just becomes sad. Just then he gets a drink and he hears a truck pull up outside. Marcos finds this strange because he lives in a pretty rural area. Not a lot of cars go by. He goes outside and a delivery man is there with a female head at his house. She is branded FGP on her forehead. Marcos tells the delivery man angrily to take it back. The delivery guy is surprised because a female FGP is worth like a fortune. The delivery guy says that this is a gift from El Gringo, an apology for fucking up the last delivery. Marcos vehemently refuses, but the delivery guy can't do anything about it. If he comes back with the FGP, he will be executed and slaughtered for meat too. With no choice, Marcos, being a little empathetic to this delivery guy, signs and puts the FGP in his barn. Remember, this is a living human, not just some sort of animal. He calls El Gringo and angrily tells him to get rid of it. El Gringo says that not only is this an FGP, it is a special FGP, bred to be extremely pure and tasty. He says that if Marcos doesn't want her, El Gringo will come by in a couple days with some slaughterhouse workers and kill her, and they'll have a barbecue. Marcos, frustrated, just says forget it. He'll keep her. He angrily hangs up and gets a bowl of white rice and water to take out to the barn. The FGP is scary. She pees on the ground, but Marco gives her some food and water and leaves. The next day he has to go on another business trip, this time into the city, where there is now curfews and people are always using umbrellas due to the disease that they fear from the birds. It was almost a disgusting reminder of what the world used to be and how much it's changed. This time he has to go into a city butcher shop, a place where underpaid workers would do their job before the transition, but now it's a pretty prestigious job to do what they do. It's very highly paid. This place is owned by a woman named Spannel, a strange woman that was one of the first to reopen her shop after the transition and selling human meat. Thus, she is very well respected in the industry. Right before he gets there, he thinks of the FGP in his barn, if she's cold or if she has enough food, clearly caring about the poor girl. He gets there and meets her assistant, El Perro, they call him, because he is as loyal as a dog. Finally, El Perro leads Marcos back to Spannel, and then he scurries away like the roach he is. They talk for a bit, and Marcos describes Spannel. She is brutal and stoic always. A little strange, but he doesn't think that she would ever really harm him. They talk, and Spannel takes out some of the new stuff she's been carrying in the butcher shop. Things like fingers and eyeball wine. They both take some eyeball wine, and Spannel then pushes Marcos on the table that she uses to cut meat with the entrails of humans still on it. But she doesn't try to slice him up or anything. She takes off her blood-stained apron and starts having sex with Marcos. She grabs some meat hooks as they have sex. Remember, Marcos is married, by the way. separated from his wife, but still married nonetheless. Although Marcos doesn't really do anything about this. He tries to undress her, so I guess it's not really clear if this is consensual or not. It's really not, but it's really strange. Although Marcos says she's never done this to him before. They finish up and drink some more wine, despite it only being 10 a.m. Spanel says nothing for a while after, until she randomly blurts out that she doesn't understand why people smile with teeth. It's like showing you their skeleton, and that's weird. Okay, so Spanel is a little strange, to put it nicely. Marcos confusedly smiles, and she leaves. They sign the paperwork, and Marcos says that it's weird how Spanel is both extremely brutal and somewhat feminine at the same time, and it just confuses him. Although, someday, he would like to break her cold attitude. So this whole chapter is like weird, but whatever. He doesn't want to go home, but the female FGP is still in the barn, and he has to do something about her. So he goes back, cursing El Gringo the whole way home. Some people keep their head, eat them one piece at a time. Some people get studs to inseminate them and grow their own little farm. But Marcos has no idea what to do with her. He goes into the barn and looks pitifully at the FGP. He thinks she looks cold. He wakes her up and she looks terrified. He thinks to himself that this poor woman's whole life is fear and nothing else. He goes inside to get her some blankets, and as he does, he thinks back to a news story he once saw where a family had 10 heads to be their slaves. After they were found out, the government shipped both the family and the enslaved head to the slaughterhouse to die, even though it wasn't the head's fault. They put out a statement saying, "Slavery is barbaric. Who would do something this evil?" This is obviously ironic, as people kill and eat humans every day in this world, but slavery, no, that's barbaric. It's not hard to see the point that the book is trying to make here, but let's continue. Marcos finds some blankets and takes them to the FGP, takes a shower, and then thinks about his wife, about his dead son, in the little crib that will never be used again in his house. So this confirms that Marcos lost a son, and this is probably why Cecilia, his wife, is really mentally broken and won't talk to him right now. Kind of a bombshell at the very end of a chapter, but let's move on. He wakes up from a call from the nurse at his father's nursing home. She tells him that his father had an accident again. It's nothing serious, but it would be good to come and visit him just in case. He agrees and calls his sister. You see, Marcos has a pretty spotty relationship with his sister. She moved far away and doesn't take care of their father at all, monetarily or emotionally. She also only seems to care about appearances. He calls her and then she makes an excuse, something like, well, she would go visit their father, but she lives so far away and she's worried about the curfew, and she would like to have dinner with him sometime though, even if she can't go and visit their father with him. Marcos angrily hangs up on her. Right before the nursing home, there's an abandoned zoo though. He knows the zoo is dangerous, as there are still animals that sort of roam around sometimes in it. Remember that not all animals were either driven out or killed. They're just mostly driven out and killed. He says that a lot of people resisted the transition, as people didn't want to kill their pets. But as they were infected by the virus, they had no choice. But people got lethal injections to put their dogs and cats out of their misery early. Before he gets to the nursing home though, he gets to the zoo where his dad used to take him. He remembers a time when his dad took him there to look at all the lions. All the kids were shouting that they wanted to see the lions, and Marcos told his dad to look because the lion was coming out. And then the lion comes out, and he looks old, slow, aged, beaten up. He tells his dad to look, although all the other kids fall silent, unimpressed by the old lion. His dad silently holds back tears at the fact that this lion is not what he once was, and all the children are no longer happy with it. Marcos finishes reminiscing about his father and flicks his cigarette out. He leaves the zoo and goes to the nursing home, and thinks how much he hates this place. It smells like piss and medicine, which if you've been to a nursing home, yeah, that's pretty apt. Nolita, who is his father's nurse, has always been friends with Marcos. Cecilia, Marcos's wife, used to be a nurse here too, and that's how they met. Marcos was visiting his dad one day and he fell in love with Cecilia. Everyone knew that a nurse from this place married the son of one of the patients. Nalita, the nurse, brings his dad out. He's in a wheelchair and isn't really all there. She tells him that his dad had another episode last night where he took off all of his clothes and ate some food in the kitchen. My grandfather had dementia, actually, and did this exact same thing one night and cried under the piano because he didn't understand anything. And let me tell you, it's brutal. He bends down and asks his dad how he's doing. His dad doesn't respond. He just mumbles. Doesn't recognize his own son. It's pretty sad. In addition to all this, a lot of seniors in the book, when they die, they get made into special meat, as some of them don't have families, so they are sold for cheap because they are old meat. And it is in demand because they're so old, it's really cheap and anyone can get access to it. He doesn't want that to happen to his dad, because despite everything, he's still his dad. The only one Marcos has ever had. The next day, he finally goes to his own plant, the Krieg plant. He gets there and sees nothing all around the plant. It's isolated, though there are people known as scavengers that circle the fences of the plant, just waiting to get in and steal some special meat. Sometimes they have to throw stuff that can't be used out, like destroyed meat and tainted meat. It's cheap, and it's meat at least, so there are literally hundreds of scavengers that just circle the fences eating this tainted meat. He gets in the plant and sees all the employees. Some say hi to him, some just walk by. Remember, Marcos is like a middle manager here, but he's also the right-hand man of Krieg, who owns the Krieg. It's like named after him, like Planet Vegeta. He sort of runs place instead of Krieg because Krieg is not really a people person. He hates people and doesn't really talk to anyone but Marcos. He's great with numbers, but bad with people. He sees the secretary as he walks in and she offers him some coffee. He says sure and goes up to Krieg's office. Krieg likes Marcos because the other employees see him as an authority figure, but in Marcos's mind, no employee really knows him. No one knows that he lost a child, or that he has a bad relationship with his sister, or that his dad is slowly dying in a demented stupor. None of the employees know that he has a female head in his barn and can't bring himself to kill it. Krieg tells Marcos to sit down. There are 2 new applicants for the plant today. A tall man and a short man. That's the only description he gives. He wants Marcos to interview them and hire only one of them. In addition to that, a security guard was caught with a female recently, having sex with an FGP. So they have to find a new security company too now. Not only that, it is implied that the security guard was killed and made into special meat for this horrible transgression. Marcos agrees and goes to see the applicants he has to interview. He asks them why they want to work here. The tall one says his girlfriend is pregnant, and although he doesn't really want to work here in a slaughterhouse for humans, the pay is really good, remember? Marcos, not being a bad interviewer, said that's pretty fair, honestly, considering that Marcos is sort of doing the same thing for his dad. The shorter one says that he was referred by a friend who works at a hamburger factory. For some reason, Marcos straight up says that he doesn't believe this short guy at all. He's lying. You can tell there's something a little off about this short guy. The taller applicant is very inquisitive and asks questions, though. The shorter one just observes gleefully. They go through the different stations of the Krieg, like the manure station, where they now sell human manure for crops and such. Marcos tells them that if the head are sick, they can tell from the manure beforehand as well. If they are sick and don't get better, they just slaughter them and give the special meat to scavengers. Marcos then says that they have to stun the meat before they kill it, so the meat is tender. Listen, I believe this is a thing that happens in the real world as well. Like cows and pigs. It's disgusting. But yes, in the real world, they stun animals to make the meat more tender. And in the book, they do it to humans before killing them. So they are peaceful and asleep when they die, so the meat doesn't get tainted. The taller applicant sees all of this and gets pale and looks like he's shaking. Marcos thinks that there is no way he is going to be able to handle what he shows him next at the next station, because it's the most stomach-churning part of the plant. They get to the stunning room, and Sergio, the best stunner in the plant, comes up to them. Marcos likes Sergio, an actual friend in the plant. Sergio doesn't look at Marcos like a manager or a right-hand man of the boss, but he looks at him like a person. Marcos told Sergio that his son died, and instead of looking at him with pity or telling him that his son is in heaven or anything, he just sat in silence with him, sharing in his pain. He took him to a bar and told jokes and got drunk and had fun. It didn't take the pain away, but it was nice to have someone there. The smaller man asks why they can't go into the stunning room, because they have to watch from an observation room. He wants to get up close and watch. Marcos is disgusted by this man and says that only people allowed in are people with the correct gear on. He goes on and demonstrates. A head gets pulled in on a metal conveyor belt on the roof, held up by her feet and dangling, like a factory farm chicken. She is crying and shaking. Sergio goes up to her and quietly sings to her. She calms down a little, and Sergio knocks her out with a tool, like a blackjack or something. He goes in and says that you have to stun them just right. If you hit them too light, they don't get fully knocked out and the meat is ruined. If you hit them too hard and kill them, the meat is ruined. The stunning is a strangely delicate job. The shorter man enthusiastically shouts out that he wants to try. They all laugh at him, thinking he's way too eager. Marcos thinks that there's no way he's going to give this job to the short guy. They go to the next station, the killing room. The stunned female continues down the ceiling conveyor belt. The next room, the next employee sits and waits. He sits there and talks to another employee haphazardly, and he takes a very long time. Marcos realizes this as he does, and the female is waking up. She gets loose and falls to the ground. Someone has to take a stun gun and knock her out. Then they slit her throat and kill her. The meat is now ruined on this female, ruining Sergio's hard work. This employee ruined his work. Marcos goes up to him and reprimands him, and they continue on. The next stop is the offal room. Here they flay the corpses and blowtorch them, getting brains and entrails for other uses as well here. Someone has to go and also sew their assholes shut, because as you may know, when you die, you shit yourself, and this can ruin the meat if it touches it. So this has to happen, which, by the way, is a real thing in the meat industry too. Everything here happens in a real slaughterhouse in the real world. It's not very glamorous, huh? While they continue, Marcos thinks what the workers are thinking about as they kill humans, storing hearts of humans. How many people have to die for Marcos's paycheck? How many must die so that Marcos's dad may live? The final stop is the chainsaw station. People chainsaw the organless bodies and cut them up and freeze them. Here there is an employee named Manzanillo. Manzanillo looks at Marcos in disgust, and Marcos doesn't blame him for this. You see, Manzanillo used to be part of a team in this room. Another employee named Ensi was with him. They were inseparable, the perfect team of chainsawers. Ensi was extremely smart, reading books all the time and explaining the plot to other workers. Kind of like me, only I'm a fucking idiot and not smart. They were like the best chainsaw team ever. Until one day, Ensi started to change. He became quieter, stopped reading books on his breaks. He would just stare at the cages when he was resting. One day, he ran over to them and released the entire head shipment, telling them that they can't die like this. They're humans, they're not animals, it's wrong. However, despite his heart being in the right place, they are effectively animals. They can't understand him. They never learn to understand English. A couple run and a couple just stay there. However, all of them were eventually caught. This little rebellion that Ensi did nothing but give the employees a small break. Ensi had to be fired though. Obviously psychologically broken, or so they say. However, Marcos made sure to tell Krieg to get him psychological help after he was fired though. But it didn't matter. Ensi shot himself in the head with his kids still in the house a couple weeks later. Ever since, Manzanillo hated Marcos for firing his partner and getting him killed. It's understandable to Marcos and he accepts this. They finish their tour and Marcos notices something in the short applicant's pocket. A cell phone. He'd been filming this entire process. Marcos grabs him and breaks the phone over his knee. No one is allowed to know how all this slaughterhouse stuff works. They escort the shorter man out of the building. Afterwards, he offers his hand to the taller applicant, saying that he will hear from them. Taller applicant shakes his hand and thanks him, but without any happiness behind his words for getting hired. This doesn't bother Marcos, though. No one would actually want this job, but some people need it. He walks outside and his wife calls him, the first time after the death of their child. She calls to check up on Marcos. She looks horrible, he thinks over the video phone. Marcos says that he wants to see Cecilia. He wants to see his wife, but she says that she needs to be alone. Marcos says gently that Leo was his son too. He lost his son too. They should be together. Cecilia silently cries and hands the phone off to her mother. His mother-in-law takes the phone and apologizes to Marcos. She says that Cecilia just needs more time. Marcos knows that's not true. Cecilia will never get better from this. How could she? No parent should have to bury their child. Marcos thinks about all they went through just to have his wife get pregnant. Low egg count with her, problems with the pregnancy, and after Leo was born, he ended up dying in his sleep anyway. A horrible turn of events. He gets home not only exhausted from the long day, but devastated about his wife, again. Let alone his dead child still. He gets home and puts some feed for the FGP in a bowl and feeds her. She looks at him in primal fear. He walks up to Leo's old room and stares at the cot yet again. He thinks about Leo's tiny feet and hands in the cot. He gets furious and rips the cot outside and douses it with kerosene. He chops it up with an axe and then lights it on fire. He no longer cares that the female FGP escapes. He looks at the barn and she looks at the cot that's now in flames. She looks sad. But there's no way she understands what's going on. He drunkenly falls asleep on the grass of his own yard. The next morning, he wakes up naked in his own yard again. He remembers his dream that he had last night. He was alone in a dark and disgusting room. His father sits in a corner, and in the other corner, a wolf eating his dead son. The wolf snarls if anyone comes close to it. His father cries for Leo. His wife appears with a face of spannel. She's beautiful and radiant, but he knows it's his wife. She sinks a stone in his chest, and he sinks into a white abyss. Just ignore this dream for now. We will discuss it in the analysis, but just know this happened. He gets up and sees that the female didn't escape from the barn, actually. She just fell asleep on the grass right next to him. He's startled at first, but then he thinks about her. She's beautiful. Her skin is pure white and glistens in the morning sun. Long, straight hair, although it is dirty and messed up. He lies back down next to her and feels the heat of her body near his. He smells her strong odor, which surprisingly isn't that bad, but smells more like the fresh scent of jasmine. He wonders why he even cares about this. Just because she's beautiful won't make her taste any better when he eats her. He thinks about the same thing whenever he's at the Krieg and sees a beautiful woman. He pulls her up and wakes her. He brings her back to the barn and locks it. She doesn't seem to resist or anything this time, though. He drives back to Spannel's shop, and what follows is another strange scene. He gets there, and Spannel is cutting some carcasses up, and then he forcefully pins her to the table and removes her apron. She sits in agony, waiting for him to do stuff to her. El Perro watches the whole thing from the window, furious. The loyal dog. He has his way with her, and then she sits there naked with him. This time, however, she smiles at him after, showing her skeleton. It's a strange scene, and I don't know how I feel about it, but it's very forceful and it's not good, whatever it is. Marcos' sister calls him right after, and asks him to come over. He doesn't want to go back to the FGP in the barn today, so he agrees, hesitantly. Remember, he doesn't really like his sister. He gets there and she offers to take his umbrella, despite him not having one. He says he doesn't have one, and she chastises him. Says that if a bird were to happen to fly over his head and poop on him, he'll die from this virus. Marcos says that the virus is fake, it's a conspiracy from the government to get people to comply. His sister shows a small amount of affection towards him, which he thinks is fake anyway. Him and her both argue about whether or not the virus is real for a while, but then they just agree to disagree. His sister tells him about her kid, new game that they've been playing. A video game where you raise a virtual pet, like Nintendogs. She has a cat, but her kids have unicorns and dragons, fantastical animals. His sister says that her husband isn't going to make it for dinner today. Marco says he doesn't care about her husband, but his doctor says that he can no longer eat meat. Although that is a lie. He just doesn't like eating people, like a normal person. She then asks if he's one of those veganoids, but he's just quiet. He also notices a new freezer in her house. He peeks in and sees that his sister has now kept a specimen in a walk-in freezer. Just waiting to get eaten, I guess, but it's alive. There's a knock at the front door and the kids walk in. They walk in the door and he sees them. They're twins. They sit down and dinner starts. His sister serves the twins, or as she likes to call them, the kids, because she doesn't like the term twins for some reason, and feeds them kidneys served with some lemon. They don't talk at all, though, and their mom asks why they aren't talking to anyone but themselves. Maru and Estebancito, which are their names, said that they were just wondering what Uncle Marcos tastes like. His sister is fed up with him and stabs a knife in the table and says, "We don't eat people, we aren't savages." Which is obviously ironic, because they are eating people. Just people without names, and people they don't have to know or think about. Almost like animals. Marcos knows that if he leaves right now, it'll look like the twins offended him. So he plays along and says that he thinks that Estebancito would taste like a fattened pig, and Maru would taste like delicious salmon. The kids are surprised, but laugh along with his joke. They don't know what a pig or salmon tastes like, as they were born after the transition, but they laugh anyway. They all continue eating, and Marcos realizes his sister hasn't even mentioned their dad for like an hour. He doesn't like that his sister doesn't like to pay a cent to help their dad at all. He has to go through this horrible job, and she doesn't even try to help pay, even though she feigns to everybody that she's so caring and broken up about their dad. Marcos finally angrily blurts out, "Dad is fine, by the way." She says that that's good. Marcos says she never visits their dad anyway. She makes excuses like, "Oh, the nursing home is so far away," or "the kids have school all the time," or something. The twins strangely then say they want to visit Grandpa over and over. Marcos' sister finally says, "Fine." Marcos leaves and his sister gives him an umbrella and he leaves. He throws away the umbrella almost immediately though. Marcos decides to drive to the zoo and decompresses. He doesn't really hate his sister, he just doesn't like her all that much and doesn't like what she does, due to everything she does and all the excuses she makes about it. He sees a bunch of signs for animals that no longer are there. One of them has graffiti that says, "I miss the animals," and then another graffiti under it saying, "You should die for being so dumb." He walks up to the bird area of the zoo. He and his dad used to like going here. He sees a mural of Icarus. You know, the guy from the Greek legend that glued wings to his arms and flew too close to the sun. There's a huge stained glass mural of him in the bird area. He wishes he could sit and watch the sky all day here. It's that peaceful. He also wishes he could have brought Leo here. He remembers his sister at the funeral for Leo. She only consoled Cecilia, and that bothered him. She also cried and held on to the twins as if they could catch the death that Leo had caught. After the funeral, they took the tiny casket out of the ground and cremated him. You see, in this world, most people don't bury bodies anymore. Scavengers like to exhume graves and eat the dead bodies, so a funeral is really just for show in this world. They take the casket out and cremate their child. They have to sit and watch his tiny body go into the inferno and be reduced to ash and bone. He sits and realizes that he never even cried for his dead son. He just stirred in his own misery. After his flashback, he walks around some more until he finds a burned building. He enters and realizes it's a serpentarium, or a reptile house pretty much. He sees glass terrariums broken all over. He lights up a cigarette here and he hears something. He looks in one of the terrariums and sees the ground moving. Only it's not a snake here, but puppies. 4 small, dirty puppies. He goes into the cage and looks at them. They're terrified, which is normal. They've never even seen a human before. He picks one of the puppies up and it pees on him out of fear. It weighs nothing, he thinks. It's so tiny. He sits down and plays with the puppies for a bit. He laughs and pries and plays silently with them. He's never seen something so pure. He finds out all the puppies are boys. He names them Watts, Wood, Jagger, and Richards. They play for a bit, playing with branches and play fighting with each other. One nibbles on Marcos's hands. One of them is cautious and wags his tail at Marcos. He thinks back to the dogs he had right before the transition, Pugliese and Coco. When the transition started, vets would sell shots that would painlessly put animals down, as it was now illegal to own them and illegal to even keep your pets alive during the transition. He thinks he wanted to abandon them so he could avoid killing the poor animals, but he fears that would have even been worse. They'd wonder what happened to him, as well as there are some sick fucks out there that like to torture animals, especially during the transition period. He remembers how he would sit under the tree in his backyard with them and listen to music and read with the two animals by his side. He misses his dogs. His thoughts are interrupted by a very low growl, however. He realizes that, of course, they aren't just the puppies here, but their parents are around as well. Of course, they weren't abandoned. He thinks that he's trapped in this glass terrarium with the puppies now. If he breaks the glass to get out, their parents will follow out and kill him and rip him to shreds. If he locks the door so they can't get out, all 4 puppies and 2 adults will die. He quickly exits the glass terrarium and doesn't lock the door. He does, however, position a rock close to the door, so it will lock the door, sort of. The dogs will eventually be able to get out, but it might take them a while to open it. He runs to his car from the dogs, and he looks behind him and sees about 6 adult dogs, actually. Big ones. He makes it to his car with just seconds to spare and closes the doors in the growling and snarling animal's face. They are snarling and angry and barking at him. He looks not at hatred or anything at the dogs for trying to kill him, but sadness. All the big dogs are malnourished and sad looking. They're just hungry, probably. They could still kill him, but he just wants to feed them and give them water and take care of the poor animals. They are beautiful creatures. He hasn't seen a dog in so long. The last time he did was his own pets. He drives away and thinks about the 4 puppies and silently whispers goodbye to them. He gets home and it starts to rain. One of those beautiful summer storms. He thinks he has to clean up the FGP right now. It cannot wait. He has to. He silently feels sad about the puppies and his dead dogs from before the transition again, though. He goes inside and grabs a comb and a bucket of water. He goes outside and just looks at the rain for a minute. He thinks about how his former dogs would try to jump and catch all the rain. His crazy dogs. He misses them. He gets to the female in his barn and looks at her. He has to clean the barn for her soon as well. He starts combing her hair outside as the water cleanses the dirt off of her. He looks at her again. She's about 20 years old. He cleans the brand off of her forehead and sees that she's been branded about 20 times. One for each year she's been alive in the breeding center. She has grayish green eyes and freckles. She's young and beautiful. He bends down and cleans her feet and thighs and everything, so she's squeaky clean in the rain. He stands back up and looks at her yet again. She's no longer scared of him. He then sees her again, pure and perfect. Not an ounce of hatred or evil in this poor woman. She's almost like translucent in the rain. He hugs her and thinks she smells like jasmine again, and she's no longer trembling in his arms. He kisses her brand. He then thinks what he is about to do to her is illegal and it can get him killed. But he decides to do it anyway. He takes off his pants. After this chapter, there is a, time skip. Legit, like in Naruto. There's, 2 or 3 blank pages after the last chapter. So in reality, this book is really split because of this moment. This moment in the book is the crux of the book. This sort of sin in the eyes of the world right here on this page. So, about 7 or 8 months pass during this time skip. And then later, the book resumes. Marcos wakes up in a puddle of sweat. He doesn't know why he's sweating now because it's spring and it's kind of chilly now. He looks at the TV and sees that there are protesters at museums and other places where people are defacing anything with an animal on it, like the Wall Street Bull and paintings with animals. He jumps and realizes that Jasmine, which is what he now calls the FGP, is lying right next to him. He forgot that she sleeps in his bed near him now. He unties her and lets her look at the TV. She doesn't fully understand it, but she likes the pretty colors on it. He has also gotten her to wear clothes, finally, after a lot of trying. It's almost like he's domesticated her. He then rubs his hand over her belly. Jasmine is now 8 months pregnant with Marcos' child. He starts to drive to work after leaving something to drink for Jasmine. His wife tries to call him on the way to work, which is something she's been doing more often lately, saying things like, "You seem different, and I hope you haven't forgotten about us." When she says us, she means her and Leo, but neither of them will say that out loud. He gets to work and greets the receptionist and asks where Krieg is. She says he's downstairs with the Church of Immolation again, in an annoyed tone. He goes downstairs and meets them all. Krieg looks tired with a bunch of people in white tunics. They all shout things in unison like, "Virus," and "We are the real virus," and pseudo-religious stuff like that. Krieg hands the church off to Marcos as if he doesn't want to deal with them anymore. And honestly, Marcos doesn't blame him. They are here for their little annual sacrifice. You see, the people in this church known as the Church of Immolation, when they get old or sick, they like to sacrifice their bodies so others can eat it. They think that humans are all evil and they can only be good once they give themselves to other humans, and that's the human body's true meaning. To fully be saved in the eyes of God is to give your bodies to others to eat. That way you aren't taking anymore, just giving. That is the only time when humans are not truly evil. Which is a somewhat interesting and somewhat coherent message, if they weren't ritually sacrificing themselves all the time and considering all humans to be horrible, horrible beings. An old man is with them this time, and he is the one being sacrificed today. A man named Gaston. Marcos remembers the last time they were here. Last time it was a young woman, around 18. The receptionist, who is named Mary, by the way, tries to stop them, saying that their church was fake and stupid. They brainwashed this 18-year-old girl to kill herself for food for others, and it's grotesque. Someone had to calm Mary down, and she thinks that they should all just commit mass suicide if they believe in their values so much. Not only that, the church doesn't know this, but all of their bodies aren't given to normal people. They're given to the scavengers around the plant. The worst of the worst, according to Marcos. He thinks that usually when people get to the stunning room where they get stunned, they start having second thoughts. They cry and piss and vomit, trying to get out of their execution, but it's too late. They give Gaston some water, but the water is slightly drugged, so he will be calm as possible during the execution. Another time this happened, a woman cried and screamed and pissed trying to escape the stunning room when she was in there. This was on the day that he found out Jasmine was pregnant, actually. He was happy, but realizes that the baby cannot officially be his. The government will kill her and him and the child if they find out. He doesn't know what he's going to tell people once the baby is born, but he tries to put it in the back of his mind for now. But she's 8 months pregnant. He's going to have to eventually think of something quick. Gaston stumbles a bit and is led to the slaughter room. He gets scared, and Sergio, the stunner, has to be quick as Gaston starts to freak out. Marcos thinks they need to use more tranquilizers next time in the water. After all of that, they take Gaston's body out to the scavengers. He takes a shower before he goes home, as if he does it at home, Jasmine tries to get into the bathroom and shower with him. She follows him around now, like a dog. The house is broken still, though, in Marcos' head. Something horrible is going to happen soon. Marcos can feel it. It's just beneath the surface waiting. However, Jasmine's life and silent laughter has filled the house as well, making it better than it was before at least. He has to put mattresses on the floor and locks all the cupboards though, so she can't get into them or hurt herself. He also installs cameras so he can watch her while he's at work from his phone. She is literally like a dog in his house. The next day he's on a meat run at the nature reserve. He's talking to a detestable man named Erlet, which, by the way, I believe the name translates to scream in Romanian. Erlet asks Marcos if he's ever eaten someone who is still alive as he is eating him. There's a certain vibration, he says, as if you are literally siphoning life from this thing into yourself. Marcos says he hasn't done that. He's super uncomfortable with this whole conversation. Erlet is literally like a stereotypical vampire. He looks like one, at least. His nails are long, yet clean, as if he is a monster with the skin of a man. Erlet drinks from a crystal chalice with heads of humans lined up on the walls behind him, trophies from his hunts. Here at the nature reserve, people hunt people, like for sport. Not only these heads here, but a photograph of a man with 4 dead men in Africa also hangs on his wall. A successful hunt in Erlet's head. Erlet's hard to read though as well. He looks both ancient and young at the same time. Marcos thinks he could be 40 years old or he could be 70 years old. He has no clue. He thinks he represents some sort of prime evil left in the world. Erlet left Romania after the transition as it is illegal to hunt humans there. His Spanish is nearly perfect, though. And yeah, if you didn't know, this book takes place in Spain or Barcelona or something. Urlet looks at Marcos, waiting for a response about his theory about eating someone alive and siphoning their life force. Marcos says, yeah, it must be invigorating to eat someone that's alive. Urlet instantly knows that he is lying. It's almost as if he can read minds. That's how good he is at reading people. The other hunters enter the room and Marcos hands Urlet the paperwork for a shipment of head. His nail accidentally touches Marcos and Marcos shivers. He wonders if whatever monster that lives within Urlet will ever be set free. Urlet says that he doesn't want any more pregnant females. Not more than a couple, at least, as the fetus, when extracted very early, is a delicacy to eat. But after a while, the pregnant females become submissive and protective of their bellies, and it's not very fun to hunt them in his head. Big and strong male heads, though, he hasn't increased his order for. More fun to hunt, I guess. An assistant comes into the room and whispers in Urlet's ear. He smiles an unnatural smile and thanks him. Urlet tells Marcos that recently he has thought of a new game. Celebrities who are in a great amount of debt can come to him, and he will pay it all away for them, if they can survive on this nature reserve for a set amount of time with hunters chasing them. Hunters love to chase after and outsmart famous people, so if famous people have debt, he is more than willing to take the gamble. Marcos asks if people are really willing to risk their lives for the money like this. He says a lot of people are willing to do a lot more for a lot less. Marcos asks if that bothers Urlet, if the morality of hunting a human bothers him at all. Urlet says no. He finds it atrocious, but no. Marcos asks why he calls it atrocious if it doesn't disgust him. He says that it is atrocious, but there is beauty in embracing the evil within yourself, which, I mean, is a thing in psychology that some people say, but this sort of, pushes it a little too much. Urlet says that since the beginning of time, people have been eating each other. If not literally, then metaphorically. The transition just changed it back to literally. Nothing has changed. Which, I mean, I guess it has a certain truth to it. He is very charismatic, Urlet. Urlet gets up and opens a window in his office. Outside in the reserve, Marcos sees a man being killed and cut up. It was a rock star from the past. He can't quite remember who it was, but he knows he was very famous. And I guess he was part of Urlet's little debt forgiveness program. I hope it's not Josh Homme, my sweet. Urlet gets up, and although Marcos wants to leave, he instinctively follows Urlet. He's hypnotic almost. They leave the room together. On the way out of the nature reserve, they run into a man named Guerrero, a former breeding center president who the Krieg no longer does business with. Guerrero did some horrible things and the Krieg cannot forgive him. Guerrero says that for old time's sake, he wants Marcos to eat this rock star with all the hunters that just killed him. His treat. Marcos tries to make an excuse, but Urlet agrees with Marcos. They will all eat together, one way or the other. Marcos finally agrees and they all head to the dining room, and an assistant insists that Marcos wears a suit jacket so he looks the part. He gets to the dining room and all the rich hunters look at him very strangely. A blue-collar man with a suit jacket and jeans. Guerrero introduces him as one of the best special meat plant workers. He works for the Krieg plant. But Marcos doesn't like how he was introduced. If he were to describe himself, he would say, and I quote, "This is Marcos Tejo, a man whose son died and he moves through life with a hole in his chest. A man who's married to a broken woman. This man slaughters humans because he needs to support his father who's lost his mind, is locked up in a nursing home, and doesn't even recognize him. He's going to have a child with a female specimen, one of the most serious crimes a person can commit, but he doesn't care in the slightest, and the child is going to be his." He obviously doesn't say this out loud, but thinks it. They serve him human fingers. They call it something in a different language as if they disguise the fact that they are eating fingers from a human that was alive just a few minutes ago. Guerrero tells a story about a place where you can pay for sex, and then, for an extremely high price, you can buy the prostitute and eat them after. Off the books, of course. Another hunter asks how the prostitutes taste, in both ways. Guerrero puts his hand up to his lips as if to shush him. You can't legally eat someone with a name, so that's all in the hush-hush, but if you have enough money, you can do anything in this world. Another hunter mentions how he did the same thing with a 14-year-old girl prostitute. Raped her for hours and then ate her afterwards. Guerrero invited Marcos here to lunch so he could hear how much money these men have to do deplorable things with, to rub his face in it, because the Krieg no longer works with him. Marcos is rightly disgusted but doesn't say anything. Erlet, who is sitting right next to Marcos, tells him to try the fingers. It's not proper to refuse a dish at this kind of dinner table. Marcos disgustedly eats and does realize that, unfortunately, it does taste great. He misses eating meat, but he is disgusted that this is so tasty. An assistant brings out the tongue of the rock star they killed next. They all laugh and ask if they eat it, will they sing like the rock star? Like a joke. Then he serves his severed penis and brings it out. They all make jokes, but Guerrero says that eating it will increase sexual energy. No one is laughing now. Guerrero asks how he was caught. The hunter said that the rock star was hiding. He only had 2 hours left until his debt was fully free. They all toast their glasses to each other, except Marcos, who is just thinking about Jasmine in his home. Okay, let's take a small break here, and I'm going to warn you. This next chapter I'm about to describe is probably the hardest chapter I've had to read in like any book in my life. It's not too graphic or anything, but it involves the violence and deaths of dogs. If you want to skip this chapter, I don't blame you. Here on the screen is the timestamp if you want to skip it. You are missing some story and themes, but if you can't deal with it, it's completely understandable. Okay, here we go, last warning. Let's go into it. Marcos starts his drive home and passes the zoo once again. He thinks about the last time he went there, during the time skip. He thinks about it and doesn't want to stop after that day. You see, a little after the start of the time skip, Marcos went back to the zoo to see the puppies again. Marcos noticed a break in the stone wall of the reptile house where the puppies were, and he heard some commotion in there. He peeked in and sees a group of teenagers. Near them, there were the puppies. They were laughing and holding sticks. One of the boys throws one of the puppies into the air and whacks it with a stick as if he was volleying a tennis ball. The dog smacks against the wall and falls down into a puddle of blood, near the dead body of another puppy. The other puppies near the bodies are whimpering, shaking, crying, and peeing in fear. Another boy picks up one of the pure little creatures as it's whimpering. The boy says he wants to know what it feels like to smash its head into the wall, and he does just that. He said it felt like nothing, it was so light. He then says he wants to do something to the final puppy. Marcos notices that the last one left was Jagger. The boy picks up the final puppy, and just as he's about to throw it in the air and volley it, Jagger bites him on the finger. A small revenge for his family of puppies. The other teenagers laugh at first, but then they stop once they realize what this means. They say that the boy who was bit is gonna die now. He has the virus. The boy nervously says that the virus is fake. He knows it's just the government trying to control overpopulation and stuff. He angrily shakes Jagger in the air and then chucks the poor animal against the wall. Jagger doesn't die immediately though. He whimpers and slides down the wall and is mortally wounded and in a ton of pain, and it can do nothing but wait till it dies. The other teenagers suggest that they set Jagger on fire. Marcos can't watch this anymore. He knows if he tries to stop them, they'll kill Marcos. Marcos is an adult and they're teenagers, but there is a lot of them, and they have sticks. He can't do anything. He hates himself for it, unable to do a damn thing, but he has to leave. Okay, hard part is over now. The next day after the zoo, Marcos is getting his morning interrupted by a federal domestic head inspector. You see, in this world, there is inspectors that have to make sure that all domestic head are within safety guidelines. Made sure they haven't been inseminated by someone or have any safety issues with them. You know, normal stuff. Basically, to be made sure that they aren't treated like domestic cows or anything. However, Marcos isn't worried. He used to work with a man named El Gordo from the department. Him and El Gordo are pretty good friends, or at least they used to be. They actually used to both be inspectors as well back in the day, doing exactly what this young man in Marcos' house is doing now. And he knows nothing is better than to brighten up his day with someone breaking the law and having someone come arrest them. He and El Gordo had a rule together. However, if either of them ever had an inspector come, you could just sign the paperwork and say that he knows El Gordo or that they just know Marcos, and they will just let them sign and be on their way to not waste any time. Marcos goes to the door and asks the inspector where to sign so he can get back to his day. However, the inspector questions him, asks to see the specimen so that he can get back to his day. Marcos confusedly asks what he's talking about. He mentions El Gordo, and the inspector says that El Gordo is in a different sector now. He has no more rulings. Marcos then panics. He has a pregnant head in his house right now, one that he inseminated himself that is off the record. He then asks the inspector in for some drinks to stall for time, but the inspector denies. He says he just wants to see the specimen so he can go on his way. Marcos, however, insists. The inspector now knows something is up, so he agrees. While Marcos makes him a drink, he steps aside to call El Gordo. Marco asks how El Gordo's doing and then makes a shitty excuse and why he can't show Jasmine the inspector. El Gordo apologizes and Marcos hands the phone to the inspector. Somehow, El Gordo clears it all up. And with it all cleared up now, the inspector gives a fake smile to Marcos, knowing something is up here and he's breaking the rules somehow. However, he grits his teeth, takes the form out, and has Marcos signs it and leaves. Marcos thinks he never thought he'd be the one committing these crimes he once helped enforce. The inspector leaves and Marco rushes to his room where Jasmine is. He cries and rubs her belly, relieved. Jasmine doesn't understand, obviously, but he's just happy they're safe. They go outside and sit under the tree that he used to read under with his dogs. They sip lemonade and Marcos gets Jasmine to her feet and dances slowly with her under the tree. The song they are listening to is fast, but dancing slow with her just feels better. Jasmine was uncomfortable at first, but starts to smile and love dancing. Marcos thinks he can feel his old dogs dancing with them both as a family once again. The next morning, it happens. Marcos wakes up from a call from Nelita, his father's nurse, at the old folks' home. She tells him that his father's had a little accident, nothing serious, but Marcos should come see him today. Marcos says that today isn't good, maybe tomorrow. Nelita then says again, he needs to come here, right now. Marcos understands. He gets going. He leaves food for Jasmine as he knows he's going to be gone all day. He gets in his car and drives. He drives to and smokes a cigarette to distract himself from what Nelita obviously was implying that happened. But he can't even pull a drag of a cigarette. He just coughs and chucks it out the window. He has this feeling like there's a stone crushing his chest now. He stops at the zoo before he gets there and angrily knocks the sign over in pure adrenaline. Now the zoo is no longer a zoo, just a place with no name. He gets back in his car and he arrives at the nursing home. Nelita welcomes him and says she's sorry. She's just so sorry. She didn't even want to say it over the phone. Marcos's father has passed away. Marcos says that he wants to see him. Nelita leads him to his room, where his father lies. She says he passed early in the morning, peacefully, in his sleep. His hands are crossed and his hair is combed. Marcos feels the stone in his chest again and cries. At least his father is no longer suffering from the dementia. It's over. He looks out the window and sees a hummingbird, a very small one, just looking in the window. So tiny and beautiful. Marcos gets up and tries to get close to the hummingbird, but it flies away. He thinks it's his father's spirit saying goodbye to him one last time. He finally thinks to himself that there's no way something so small and beautiful could have a virus that can wipe out humanity. Nelita leads him out of his room for the paperwork. She is hesitant, though, and Marcos angrily asks why she's stalling. She says that she had to call his sister before he got here. She wants to have a wake for her father. Marcos instantly denies it. He doesn't want his sister near his father. She never visited him, and she's doing it so she can show how much she loved her father to her friends. Although in Marcos's mind, she never visited. She never paid for the nursing home. She did nothing for their father. No one that is coming to the wake ever called to check up on their father, so why should they have a service to say goodbye? Unfortunately for Marcos, though, his sister does have the right to opt for one, even though no one has funerals anymore, really. Marcos says fine. Nelita tells him that he only has one family member left, and he should be with her during this horrible time. Marcos angrily thinks to himself, when did Nelita graduate from being a nurse to being able to give advice to people? Which is kind of fucked up, but Marcos is hurting. So he's showing it in an unfortunate way. The stone in his chest feels even larger now. Marcos signs the paperwork to cremate his father. Nelita apologizes over and over because She was his personal nurse. This is hard on her too. Marcos, unwilling to even return the apology, just says fine, whatever. He's done all of this before when his son died. She apologizes again, saying it's hard for her too. Nelita leaves Marcos and gives him his father's ashes. After his ashes are returned to Marcos, he starts his drive home. He sees the zoo without the name and stops. He goes to the aviary with his father's ashes and looks at the stained glass of Icarus and just sits and watches it. He thinks back to when his father was there with him this one time after his mother died. He told him something he never forgot. His father's voice was beautiful, just this once after his mother died and then never again like this. He said that people always make fun of Icarus for flying too close to the sun, but they shouldn't, because he flew. Even just for a few seconds, Icarus flew with the birds. There's something very beautiful about this, in my opinion. This was my favorite part of the book, actually, and what it means I'll talk about in the analysis. He thinks more about his dad and how he taught him to whistle. His mother wanted to hear him whistle before she died, and his father taught him to whistle a song. However, his father told Marcos, "Don't tell your mom that I told you how to whistle." He told Marcos to fake it like he can't whistle until his mother gives him some sort of advice, and then whistle, to make it seem like his mother taught him in her final hours. It would make her so happy on her deathbed if she taught him something. So they did. Marcos stops reminiscing and says to the urn, "Goodbye, Dad. I'm gonna miss you." He then dumps the ashes out in the aviary. He leaves, and as he does, he stops by the playground. He fills the now empty urn with sand from the playground. There's still garbage mixed in the sand. He lights a cigarette and puts it out in the urn as well. This is the ashes his sister's going to get for the wake. Sand from a dirty playground from a zoo with no name. He gets back in his car and starts driving. His sister has now called him even more times, and he finally picked up. She asks him how he's doing, and Marcos feels the stone in his chest is getting bigger and worse. She asks him to bring the urn over sometime tomorrow or the day after. She would go there, but because of the distance, that's not really ideal for her. Which is strange, because it would be the same distance for Marcos, but whatever. He gets even angrier then, and then stirs in his wrath. He finally blurts out to her that it will not be tomorrow or the next day, it's when he says when it's convenient for him. She asks him not to speak to her that way, and he hangs up immediately on her. He goes home and leaves Jasmine in her room. It's already too late for her to be awake anyway. He grabs a bottle of whiskey and goes out back to his hammock and drinks himself until he falls asleep. He wakes up the next day and he remembers another dream that he had last night. In this dream, he was in the aviary again. Icarus on the mural had come to life and shattered. He wasn't sad though. He was happy because he flew. Despite falling, he flew. While that is happening, time seems to stop. A bunch of birds are around him now, as if they're all suspended in time. They aren't moving, but they are stuck in the air as if they were. At first, he goes up to a hummingbird. He tries to grab it, and it shatters in his hand like glass. Then he sees a nightingale, which, by the way, I have a confession real quick. I didn't know nightingales were real birds until I read this book. I thought they were something Skyrim made up. I'm 25. But anyway, he grabs it, and although it's still frozen in time, it screams at him, as if it's in extreme pain. Every bird he touches fades away in his hands. He then gets to a forest and sees a butterfly. It too shatters in his hands. Other versions of himself walk up to him, and they all talk to him, and then they all slump on the ground and die. Everything he touches in this forest dies. He finally sees a baby hanging from a noose in a tree. He tries to grab it, but it too shatters or turns to smoke. Then a bunch of ears appear on him, and as he tries to rip them off of him, they tear his skin apart. He doesn't get to scream until he finally wakes up in the hammock. The next day, he has to go to another client of the Krieg plant, Volca Laboratories. He hates this place more than any other he has to go to. They experiment on specimens in horrible ways. Some people even call Dr. Volca Joseph Mandela, the Nazi angel of death. As he's driving, he talks on the phone with Krieg himself. Krieg tells him that, considering his father passed away yesterday, he doesn't have to go to the lab today if he doesn't want. It's okay if he wants some time off. Marcos says that he'll go today, it's fine. but never again. He'll train someone to do this job for him. Krieg goes silent, as Volca Laboratories is the top buyer of specimens. Krieg argues with him because Marcos is the best, and he needs the best to go there, and Marcos says that either he will train someone to go to Volca Laboratories from now on, or he resigns right now. Krieg shakenly says, okay, he can train someone then. Marcos gets there and Dr. Volca is waiting for him. She gloats about herself over and over, about her accomplishments or whatever, and Marcos just stares at her with an unmoving face, letting her know that he does not care about her achievements. She shows him all that she is working on. Horrible experiments, things that the Nazis would have done to Jewish people in concentration camps. That sort of quote-unquote science. Because remember, to these people, specimens are not humans. Marcos, tired of seeing all of this horrible stuff and already fed up with the world itself at this point, asks Dr. Volca whether it's weird that there is no cure for the virus in the animals yet. It's been like 10 years. You think that such a prestigious doctor like her could have found a cure for it by now, right? He wonders why that is, both implying that he doesn't think that the virus is real and belittling Dr. Volca. She is fed up with him though. She tells him to just get out and she'll talk to Krieg directly next time. Once he leaves, Cecilia calls him. She says that she heard about his dad and she is so sorry, but he never even called her about him. Then she says she misses him very badly, something she has not said to Marcos since after Leo died. She asks if he wants her to come over to comfort him. He says no, it's okay. She then asks if he wants her to go to the service for her father and her sister tomorrow. He says that he doesn't even know if he's going to go to the service. He then frustratedly asks if she wants him to wait on her forever to get better. She is sort of caught off guard at this question and is sad about it. They then hang up on a weird note. The next morning was the service. He wakes up and takes a shower with Jasmine to make sure she doesn't hurt herself and puts on a suit and gets going. His sister calls and asks what's taking him so long. He hangs up on her and takes his time. He gets there and there are tons of people there, some he doesn't even know. He sees his sister and she seems extremely put together here. She's wearing makeup and a nice dress and things like that. It's not a ton of distasteful stuff, but it's noticeable that she is dressing up. She sees him and says that her father had a life of sacrifice. He gives her the urn of sand and they go inside the house. She puts it in a really nice box to show off how much she loved her father, or at least give off the impression that she did. Near it was a futuristic picture frame, one that changes photos every couple of seconds. But there's something really wrong with it. Scrolling through the photos, there was some young photos of their dad and normal things like that. But one of the photos catches Marcos off guard. It was a photo of his sister and his dad at the zoo. Only Marcos remembers the day it was taken, and his sister wasn't there. Or if she was just a baby. His sister had photoshopped a photo and taken Marcos out of it and put herself into the photo with their dad. This really rubs Marcos the wrong way. He realizes that this event isn't in honor of their father, but more to show off how much of a great daughter that his sister is. She wouldn't have had to Photoshop a photo of them if she even had any photos with her dad. She never went to visit their dad in the nursing home. No one at this service did. Their father had to sit alone in the nursing home, sitting with his own madness until Marcos could visit every time he could. No one visited him. He was alone. No one else cared enough. No one here knew that his father loved birds, or that he loved his wife dearly and had something die in him when his wife died. There's a chance none of these people even know that he had dementia, that he just died. Marcos' sister pulls out a handkerchief and puts it to her eyes and pretends to dab her tears away, which are not actually there. Marcos walks to the kitchen and his sister follows him, asking him where he's going, but Marcos ignores her. He goes up to that door where that specimen was the last time he was here. He notices a book near the door, one that was a new trendsetter book for the community that shows off how to cut off limbs from your specimen and eat them one piece at a time. Marcos feels disgusted. He looks in the door and sees that the specimen
just looks sad without her arm that everyone else is eating out here. He tries to open it up, but his sister stops him. He turns around and sees her, tapping her foot impatiently with him. That is when the stone in Marcos's chest shatters. He then gives a speech to his sister, and I'm going to read it in full because it's important. Marcos says to his sister, "You disgust me. What is wrong with me is that you are a hypocrite and your 2 kids are little shits. Can't you see that you are incapable of thinking for yourself? The only thing you do is follow the norms imposed upon you. Can't you see this whole thing as a superficial act? Are you even capable of feeling something for yourself? I mean, have you ever even cared about Dad? You don't understand anything. If you keep fucking with me, I'll tell everyone how you did nothing when it came to Dad. Understood?" Marcos says this all and leaves. His sister begs him not to leave, but he leaves anyway. He goes back inside to his car when he sees his sister is freaking out that she is outside without an umbrella. As he drives home, he gets a call from the receptionist at the Krieg plant. He's confused because he called out today for the wake, and they knew that. And they're generally pretty well respective of him and his days off. He picks up and Marie, the receptionist, is freaking out over the phone saying, "It's horrible and I don't know how this could have happened." Marcos tells her to calm down and says what's going on. She apologizes over and over because she knows that the wake was today and he was saying goodbye to his father, but something horrible has happened at the plant and they need him right now. He strangely is calm and agrees with her and heads there. Before he gets there, he notices near the plant there is a truck flipped over. It's a transport truck, and the bodies litter the streets. Bodies of specimens, all murdered by scavengers. They flipped over a transport truck and are now feasting on a smorgasbord of human bodies. He feels disgusted, and he feels that the bits of stone left in his chest are now burning with fury. He gets to the plant and comforts Marie. She tells him that not only did they destroy the shipment of head, they got the poor young delivery driver out of the car and killed him too. This man was so young and he just had a child. He got this job to feed his wife and child, and now they're gonna have no father to provide for them. Marcos goes to Krieg and he calls all the scavengers degenerates and savages. He asks if Marcos is okay because he knows that today was the wake. Marcos says yes, even though in his head he says no. He feels intense anger at his sister and feels the bits of stone in his chest burning and destroying him from the inside as he thinks of the driver's son starving because of the scavengers. He then thinks of something ruthless. The only way to stop the scavengers is to take some head, poison them, and then give the corpses to the scavengers. This will kill all the head, but it will also kill all the scavengers. It's ruthless, but it'll work and keep the scavengers out of their hair for now. Krieg hesitates because Marcos is usually not this ruthless, but finally agrees. He tells Marcos to take the rest of the day off because he deserves it. Marcos leaves and looks at the scavengers yet again. He wants to feel pity for the scavengers after what they've done, but he doesn't feel anything. Not anymore. He feels nothing. He drives home to Jasmine. He hasn't checked up on her all day, and this is the first time he never checked on her on his phone. He gets home and opens the door to see Jasmine. On the floor, in intense pain, screaming in silent screams. Green and brown fluid leaks from her private parts. Marcos rushes to her, and he knows that the brown and green amniotic fluid means that something is wrong with the pregnancy. Marcos worries if another child of his is going to die. Marcos screams and whips out his phone and calls his wife, Cecilia. She was a nurse, remember? And she's the only one he trusts. He tells her to shut up and listen right now. She needs to get home right now. She says that he sounds a lot different, like an intensity she's never heard from him before. She says okay, and she's on her way now. She knows something is wrong, though. Marcos hangs up and grabs towels and things to help Jasmine before his wife gets there. Before too long, he hears a car engine, and Marcos rushes out. His wife goes to hug him, but he stops her and tells her that she needs to not think about anything she is about to see. He needs her to be a nurse right now, not his wife. She shakily agrees. They both get upstairs to the bedroom, and Cecilia sees Jasmine. She sees that she's a specimen, and pregnant at that. She looks at Marcos with an intense sadness, nothing but pure anguish. Marcos tells her straight up, the baby is his. She calls him sick and disgusting. How could he have sex with a specimen? The government will kill him, Jasmine, and the baby if they find out. He tells her to stop talking. The amniotic fluid is green. The baby is dying. Like a switch is turned, Cecilia tells him to grab towels and hot water. He goes and grabs everything she asks, and he just paces around and says everything's gonna be okay. Nothing is wrong here, as if he's trying to convince himself. Cecilia yells at him that he's going to make her, Jasmine, and himself nervous and make things worse. It'll make things a lot worse if he doesn't leave the room right now. So he does, for consideration for his child. He puts his ear up to the door and listens to what's going on inside. He hears Cecilia yell at Jasmine to not give up. Don't die on her. One more push. She can do it. And then silence. Nothing. Then a cry. A baby's crying. He rushes in and sees Cecilia holding the baby in her arms, crying. Both of them. All three of them. All four of them now. Marcos and Cecilia cry and look at the baby and say that he's beautiful. Jasmine tries to get off the bed but slips. She's been through a lot. She's on the ground now, arms reaching for her child, screaming and crying silently, trying to grab at the baby. Marcos leaves for a second, but then comes back with something. He goes up to Jasmine. He hugs her and kisses her brand. He then silently sings in Jasmine's ear. And then he clubs her in the head and stuns her, doing exactly what Sergio would do to the head in the slaughterhouse. Cecilia screams that, why would he do that? She could have given them both more children. This is their child now. But she asks why he's going to kill her now. He then says the final line of the book, with the final pieces of the stone in his chest going away finally. He says, she had the human look of a domesticated animal. That's it. That's tender as the flesh. That's the whole book. What a disturbing ending. It completely subverts everything. And there's a lot to go over now, because everything that the book was building up to was just undermined in one page. Marcos seemed to be someone that was against the whole world at large for eating humans because it's disgusting. And he seemed to be the hero of the story. The guy who was so against the whole eating humans thing, but in the end, he wasn't better than anyone else. But what is the meaning of this book? What is it trying to say? What's the message? Well, let's go over those. First of all, obviously this book is a parallel to our world and how we treat animals in the meat industry. It's not really subtle about it, because if you didn't know, everything in this book to a T that happens to the specimens is pretty much how cows and pigs and chickens are treated, at least in America, if not a little worse in the real world. That is the first thing that truly strikes me. No matter what we as humans see or hear, some things are so ingrained in society that it's nearly impossible to change. If I were to ask you right now, if you are a meat eater, like I am, if you have seen some horrible stuff they do in the meat industry, and after this whole story is brought right in front of your face, would you continue to eat meat? Chances are, if you are like me, you'd think it's absolutely disgusting what happens to animals on factory farms and things of the life, and absolutely despicable in this book, and all horrible things that happens in the meat industry. But you're still going to eat meat. And most people will say the same thing, even knowing all the atrocities that happens in the meat industry. I know I do. And this book, I feel, is sort of making fun of people for how ingrained in society meat is. And that's okay. It's a very good message that is showing us in our faces what we are looking at in the meat industry. But the book knows that even after the story, we're not going to change. It's too ingrained in society. People are going to keep eating meat. Other themes in this book that are readily apparent is how easy it is to dehumanize people or groups of people with language, especially. How many times in this book, or even in the script, did I say the word specimen or head or anything instead of enslaved human made to eat? Using certain words or phrases makes it so easy to dehumanize people, because We aren't eating humans in this book, we're eating special meat, or specimens. There are several times in this book that someone calls someone a savage for trying to eat a person with a name, which I mean is hypocritical. And this book is very much saying that society is very hypocritical like this. Another theme is what loss can do to a person. Though Marcos wasn't the greatest person always, we went along with his journey the entire book and thought he was the good guy. But when faced with overwhelming loss, Marcos turns into one of the worst people in the book, betraying trust, killing a human, and stealing a child. Another is capitalism, and how it literally, and I mean literally fucking anything, can be bought and sold if you are wealthy enough. Even society itself. If the elite say that eating humans is okay, then it's okay. If they tell you to kill your pets, and because they have a virus, you're gonna put them out of their misery. I don't know if you noticed, but throughout the entire book, it is very unclear if the virus is even real. It's sort of alluded to that it isn't, but it's purposely unclear because who knows? But that's what the elite say. The last thing I want to talk about is Marcos's 3 dreams in the book. There was the one with the wolf, the one with the frozen birds, and then sort of a flashback during him spreading his father's ashes, which I'm just going to count as a dream. Let's talk about those 3 things. The first one was the wolf devouring his son as his father cries in the corner. I believe that this is implying that the wolf is the world at large, killing its children and how ruthless society is. His father is crying because he can't do anything about it. Those who remember a different world or time before some horrible event can't even do anything to get it back. They're powerless. Cecilia then plants the stone in his chest, and is, at least in Marcos's mind, the reason why he is weighed down by guilt and hate and sorrow. Obviously, it's not Cecilia's fault that the child died, but to Marcos, subconsciously, it is. The second dream is pretty straightforward. It's the dream with the birds that are suspended in time. Marcos touches everything in this dream and everything shatters. At this point in the story, everything Marcos touches dies in his head. It's obviously not like that, but to Marcos, how can he not see it that way? His mother, his son, his relationship, his father, and then Jasmine. All dead at his hand. Finally, I want to talk about what his dad said about Icarus. How people made fun of Icarus for falling after getting too close to the sun. His father tells Marcos that although Icarus fell, he still flew. And in a world like it is in this book, even if moments of freedom and happiness are fleeting, they still happened. It doesn't matter about the inevitable fall of Icarus, because he would have died eventually in the story. But he flew. He accomplished his goal, highlighting the resistance against the system and his goals. However, in the end, the book has a sad ending, and Marcos did not resist the system anymore. He succumbed to it. But that doesn't make his journey any less important, because although in the end of the book Marcos fell, Marcos did fly. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate and love every single one of you. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments about what you thought this book meant and what you think of it. It really helps if you like the video and subscribe as well in the algorithm, so I'd really appreciate that. I love you all, and I will see you next time.